In today's episode, we're going to take a look at 5 Xbox 360 games that you can play right now on your Xbox Series X through backwards compatibility. Because honestly, I've talked about delisted backwards compatible titles quite a bit on the channel, I wanted to go ahead and talk about classics and gems that are worth revisiting that you can play right now. They're readily available in the store, including their DLC. Now, for those that may not be aware, any compatible 360 game you play on your Series X gets automatic upgrades, making them play and look better than they ever did on a 360. You get automatic HDR, 16 times anisotropic filtering, 4K resolution upscaling, faster load times, and better frame rates and performance. So by default, the games are going to look, run, and play better than they did on 360. Now these are separate from the native upgrades that some games get, such as a patch from the developer that enables something like native 4K resolution, or frame rate boost that's enabled on the system side. Not every game has it, but the ones that do, you're able to go in your settings and toggle that option on. So there's actually only one title on this list that got a native 4K resolution upgrade, and I'll mention it when we get to it. With that being said, let's get to our first game. And the first game on our list is going to be Lost Planet Extreme Condition, released worldwide on the Xbox 360 in 2007. So the version I'm technically playing right here, and that's available for download, is the Colonies edition, which is basically a Game of the Year edition of the original game. It came out a year later. Most of the content they added is multiplayer based, which I can't speak on very much because I never really played the multiplayer, but if you're a fan of the multiplayer, let us know in the comments what it was like, because I can't speak to it. Otherwise, there's a little bit of single player content added, some different modes and whatnot, but right now I'm just focused on the story mode. So one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about Lost Planet on this list is because it really is such a throwback to the early days of 360. I've actually had a 360 since launch day, and the demo for Lost Planet came out the following year, so it was really in the early days of that era, and it was an exciting time, and it really takes me back to that time playing this game. And it was an exclusive on the 360 until about a year later. Its visuals blew my mind at the time, and they still hold up really well today. Which is not surprising because the MT framework engine that was developed in-house by Capcom has always been a very impressive engine. It started with Dead Rising, and they still use it to this day. And some of the peak that engine ever did was Resident Evil 5 and Vanquish and Marvel vs. Capcom 3. So it's a really solid engine that was very versatile at the time. Particularly with motion blur and animation. So even though this only runs at 30 frames per second, the motion blur actually accentuates the animation and it looks really cinematic, so it's really well done. The atmosphere in the super cold Arctic setting is actually really well done. You can almost feel how cold it is. And that's actually the point of the game. The whole goal is to accumulate as much thermal energy as possible, to both keep your health up and get a higher score. Now, one area of the game that's pretty bad and bizarre, but thankfully is perfectly fixable, are the default camera controls. And here's what I recommend you do. So I'm going to keep this real simple. Go to Configuration, under Aiming, there's a setting called Speed. And under Speed, you have Accelerate, which is the default, you have Cruise, and then you have Fixed. Ignore the other two, put it on Fixed. And you have Fixed 1 through 8, which is just the speed difference. I put it on 8, but you can put it on whichever one that feels comfortable to you. That's the key thing here. Otherwise, the camera controls at aiming feel really bizarre, and you have to rely on incremental turning with your buttons, and it's just weird. It's really bad controls otherwise. Now, the viewpoint, whether it be normal, zoomed, or first person, just comes down to preference. The important part is getting it on fixed. Trust me, that's the only way this is going to feel like modern aiming controls that you're used to across pretty much every game nowadays. Once you do that, it feels totally normal and everything's fine. Honestly, when it comes to the core gameplay, if you're an Earth Defense Force fan, you're going to get a kick out of this. It actually has quite a bit of an Earth Defense Force feel to it. It's almost like a less campy Earth Defense Force from Capcom. It's pretty cool. The characters in the game are actually well designed, they have good voice performances, and right away you actually get pretty engrossed in them. It's not just a brainless shooter, you actually care what's going on. There's quite the variety of weapons and different types of weapons. You're able to carry 2 at a time, whether it be rocket launchers, automatic rifles, shotguns, and so on. And you also have heavy weapons that you're able to drag around. Now, where things really get interesting are the mech suits. You're able to hop in a mech suit, which you can have a weapon on your left and right hand. They're heavy firepower and they're a lot of fun. So you really always want to keep an eye out for any mech suit laying around so you can wreak chaos. But they really are a boost to the combat. They're a lot of fun. The enemies are cool and well designed. They vary from small to really large bosses, so they're really well animated and detailed. And really at the end of the day, this is just an old school shooter. It's pretty straightforward. While it does have pretty cool characters and a story, it's just about the gunplay. And it's rather good. Honestly, it kind of feels like if EDF and The Thing had a baby. So it's pretty rad. So Lost Planet Extreme Condition, whether you're playing it for the first time or revisiting it, it's a pretty interesting gem from the Xbox 360's early days. You should check it out. It's available right now. And the next game on our list is going to be F.E.A.R 2 Project Origin, released on the Xbox 360 in 2009. So recently, Warner Brothers closed the doors of Monolith Productions, which is unfortunate because they're a really solid studio and they have a legendary lineup of titles. Condemned Criminal Origins, Blood, and of course the rest of the F.E.A.R franchise, many classics. So it was really baffling how they just closed them up like that. I don't think anybody will fully figure out why. So yeah, that was part of the reason why I wanted to go ahead and talk about F.E.A.R 2 with all that happening with Monolith, and I'm going to continue covering Monolith games on the channel. While the first F.E.A.R is considered the best in the series, I don't disagree. I covered it in a recent video if you want to check that out. But the beauty of F.E.A.R 2 is that it's available to download right now, whereas the first one is delisted. While it may not be quite as good as the first one, it still holds up really well. The graphics here are very impressive, which is no surprise because that Monolith engine, which powered the likes of Condemned Criminal Origins and all the other F.E.A.R games, has always been a very impressive engine. Fantastic lighting effects, a lot of great physics. The bullet time easily showcases this. There's a lot of visual splendor and a lot of detail. But there were a couple things I noticed with the graphics. First off, there's film noise, which is very different from the first game. The first game had a very clean look to it. But a few levels in, the film noise dissipates and it looks more like the first game, so I found that to be pretty interesting. And the frame rate here is 60 frames per second, and that's because of the power of the Series X making sure that it stays at a stable 60, because the original frame rate was unlocked. They didn't do anything to enhance the game. And that's the beauty of unlocked frame rates with older games through backwards compatibility. You put it on Series X, and bam, you have a virtually locked 60 frames per second with nothing done to the game. The game is actually very good at getting you right into it with interesting characters, good performances, and of course you have all the good graphics, very good sound and atmosphere. There's some legitimately creepy scares here. Aside from the atmosphere and the scares, the meat and potatoes are in the gunplay, and they're really solid here. I would actually argue some of the non-bullet time gunplay is actually even better in this one, especially with the addition of being able to aim down sights. But the bullet time, I would argue, is a little bit better in the first game, but it's still very solid here. Some of the best bullet time you'll have in a game other than the likes of Max Payne. Now, one complaint I do have though, the weapons are a bit of a mixed bag. The shotgun in the first game was iconic. The shotgun in this one just isn't very good. And the same goes for the flamethrower, pretty lousy. I was pretty surprised. Otherwise, I don't have too many complaints, but that did stand out to me. The weapons were more consistent in the first game. But I must say the grenades are well done and they're very useful. I was using them a lot. If you're a fan of the first F.E.A.R and you want some more scares and some more bullet time, you can't go wrong with F.E.A.R 2. I really enjoyed checking it out. And like I said, it's available to play right now. It's not delisted at the moment. So hopefully here in the future I'll cover F.E.A.R 3 and we'll continue the saga. So F.E.A.R 2, you should check it out on your Xbox Series X. Up next we have The Darkness, released on the Xbox 360 in 2007. Boy, The Darkness. This is a very interesting game that, honestly, I have a lot of strong mixed feelings on. And what I mean by strong feelings, I have high praises, and I have some issues with it. So this is kind of a funny one for me. And there are people that love this game, and I don't blame them. The game is absolutely gorgeous. This is the same engine, of course, Starbreeze Studios, from Chronicles of Riddick Escape from Butcher Bay, which is a phenomenally beautiful game, whether it be on the original Xbox version or the re-release on 360. Fantastic looking engine, and it shines here. Gorgeous lighting effects, awesome textures, fantastic motion blur that makes everything look super cinematic in its 30 frames per second, which, by the way, there's no bells and whistles here. Everything it looks as you remember on the 360, but just better with the default enhancements. So The Darkness is actually based on a comic book series where you play as 21-year-old Jackie, who on your 21st birthday, as a mobster hitman, you just find out that your Uncle Paulie has set his sights on you to get you whacked. So if you like mobster themes and mobster stories, you're going to get a kick out of this. And the voice cast and acting throughout this are really, really top-notch. This is absolutely movie quality stuff. The scripted intro segment is really cinematic and looks better than a lot of games do nowadays. It's pretty phenomenal. The atmosphere in this game is really something special. It really puts you in this dark and gritty world. You actually spend a pretty good amount of time in the subway sections, And it really reminds me of Max Payne. And there's one part of the subway that really reminds me of The Matrix, where Neo and Agent Smith fought. It looks almost exactly like it. Now, one of the most insane details in the whole game that's always fascinated me since I first played this in 2007 is the fact that there are TVs throughout the world of the game that are literally playing entire music videos and entire movies. I'll never forget just sitting there just watching stuff for hours. You can literally watch the entirety of the Sonny Chiba Street Fighter movie. That was how I actually first saw it. Even though it's totally unnecessary, it really helped establish the living, breathing world, and the music videos are actually pretty cool, and they really take me back to that era. So kind of like Lost Planet, this game has a lot of nostalgia for me. So as beautiful as Darkness is visually, it's still a fairly early 360 game, and it's to this day one of the best looking that ever came out. And that's the beauty of a good engine. It could be an early title, a late title. If the engine is really good, it's going to look better than most of its rivals. Now, when it comes to the gameplay itself, I have praises and then I have mixed feelings. The gunplay, while visually cool, I don't like the feel of the gunplay and I don't like the approach to the gunplay mechanics. Now, bear in mind, there's more to come here. So when you're dual wielding handguns, which is most of the time, when you empty a gun, you just drop it and you pick up the next one. So you have no attachment to any of the handguns you're using, and you can't select which handguns you're using. You just have whatever's in your hands. I don't like that. I've never liked that. Because in the beginning of the game, as a birthday present, you get these really cool 1911s, and you use them and they're gone. And they even showed them in between loading screens like they're these iconic weapons, but you barely get to use them. So it's really odd, the akimbo feel they did. Because you're just picking up, throwing away, and I just never liked that. Also, the shotgun just plain sucks. That doesn't help either. Now, when you get automatic weapons, that helps. So the gunplay just kind of feels wonky, which is disappointing because Escape from Butcher Bay actually had pretty good gunplay. But like I said, more to come. As the game progresses, you become possessed by the Darkness, which are literally demons on your shoulders, and they're voiced by Mike Patton, who's the lead singer of Faith No More. He does a phenomenal job voicing these. His dark and twisted voice for the Darkness is really amazing. He was praised for it then, and it still holds up today. Now, at first, you don't have too many powers to use with them. It takes time to become powerful, but as it does, it really does change up the gameplay. You're also able to summon little minions that accomplish tasks and fight alongside you, and they have their own personalities as well. So while I complained about the gunplay, it really does help the fact that all this other stuff comes along, but I still complain about it. Now, part of the mechanic of the Darkness is just that. You need to be in physical darkness in order to regain your energy. So you're going to spend quite a bit of the game taking out lights to cloak yourself in darkness. Otherwise, when you're exposed to light, it slowly zaps your power. So this is part of managing your energy in the game's mechanics. But what's cool about this is that when you are in complete darkness, your enemies are at your mercy. Which is interesting because that was also the case in Chronicles of Riddick. So you can see quite a bit of Chronicles of Riddick DNA in this. The characters, the dialogue, the atmosphere and environments, the story. In terms of all of those things and tone, this game has tons going for it. While it may not be perfect on a gameplay level, it makes up for it in all the other areas. So if you've never checked out The Darkness, you should absolutely give it a try, and if you want to relive it, it plays great on Xbox Series X. And the next title on our list is going to be Call of Juarez Bound in Blood, released for the Xbox 360 in 2009. So I've grown really fond of the Call of Juarez games. At this point, they're kind of becoming hidden gems. I wanted to cover the first Call of Juarez, but it's not backwards compatible, so this is the earliest one I was able to start with for the channel. But this is technically a prequel, so chronologically it works out. Not too long ago, I covered the History Channel Civil War titles, which are also interesting games, so it was interesting in the beginning of this game to also be thrusted into the Civil War. While not in the earliest segments of the game, eventually you're able to choose between either Thomas or Ray, which are two brothers, and they have their third brother as well, and he narrates throughout the story. The voice acting and cast here are really stellar, really witty and interesting dialogue. It's very gritty, no holds barred. I was immediately sucked into the story, very engrossing. When it comes to the graphics and the backwards compatibility, once again, there's no bells and whistles here. It's just running the game as it was, just with the default improvements. But what's nice is that the frame rate was an unlocked frame rate, so it runs at a virtually locked 60 frames per second, so it runs really great. Now, the graphics aren't exactly the caliber of the Darkness, but at least it runs smoothly, and it does get the job done. There are times that the art direction is quite impressive. I love some of the settings in this. Aside from its really cool characters and story, what drives the game home is the gameplay. It does have somewhat of a Call of Duty campaign feel to it, which is definitely not a bad thing. It has fast-paced action, solid gunplay, authentic weapons, and between the two brothers, they each have their own gameplay styles. Ray is more of the gun-toting, dual-wielding action type, whereas Thomas focuses more on rifles and range. And they each have their own special attack. It really just comes down to preference, which one you like better. They're both quite a bit different from each other, but both are equally fun. So that also adds replayability to the game, whereas if you say have a playthrough where you play mostly Ray, and you play the game again, you play as mostly Thomas, or you just go back and forth, it's up to you. So that's actually very cool. Now, I did hear that this 360 version got somewhat censored. Some of the blood and gore got taken out. I don't understand why. It's still a mature rated game, so I don't see the point, but whatever. It doesn't totally take away from the game, but I always hate to hear about any sort of censorship. I just don't see the point. Now, where I'm going to criticize the game, some of the mechanics are pretty clunky and can be hard to deal with at times. When the brothers bust through a door, for example, you actually have your left hand and your right hand with your left and right joysticks controlling them independently, and it's just weird, clunky, and awkward. It's really hard to get the targets where you want them to. I understand they didn't want it to be too easy, otherwise they would consider it boring, but I would rather it be a little bit too easy rather than clunky and difficult. Same goes when you're in a standoff drawing your pistol. I love the idea, and the execution can be really good, but it's a little bit too touchy. And if you don't do it perfectly, you're going to die. So you're going to be retrying that a lot of times, and after a while, it gets a little annoying. So you really have to overcome some of the clunkiness of the mechanics, and that's definitely not very good. It needed more time in the oven. Otherwise, I was having a really good time. It's a diamond in the rough. It's definitely worth checking out. I'm really fascinated by the series as a whole, and I'm going to be checking out more of it in the future. So Call of Juarez Bound in Blood, it's backwards compatible and available right now on your Series X. You should check it out. It's a pretty cool game. And before we get to our last title, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on the video. I'm excited to hear from you all. I love talking to the community. And finally, we have Star Wars: The Force Unleashed, released for the Xbox 360 in 2008. As much as I thoroughly enjoyed Jedi Fallen Order, as well as Jedi Survivor, they're really great games. Other than that, let's face it, they don't make Star Wars games like this anymore. It's a lost time, it's a lost era, it's unfortunate, but at least through backwards compatibility, we can re-experience Star Wars: The Force Unleashed because it's a really crazy game. The opening to this game is absolutely bonkers. It took guts to do what they did. You literally play as Darth Vader roaming around Kashyyyk taking out Wookiees. That's how they introduce you to the game's basic mechanics. It's pretty crazy. Which ultimately leads to Vader taking out his target, and it turns out his target, who was a Jedi, had a secret son. Sensing the Force being strong in this kid, Vader decides to take him in as his new apprentice, which he's kept secret from the Emperor. Which creates an interesting dynamic in the story and the missions because you're not serving one side or the other, you're serving Vader's agenda, which makes it where anybody can be in your crosshairs. So you're fighting everybody. And of course, the apprentice Starkiller is played by Sam Witwer, who's super talented and he's done tons of work in the Star Wars universe, including doing voice work for the Clone Wars series as both Darth Maul and the Emperor and more. He's been fantastic throughout Star Wars and he's no different here. But in the case of Starkiller, it's his total likeness and normal voice, so it's a really cool way to see Sam Witwer in his own element. And for those that may recognize him in a newer game, his total likeness and voice is also in Days Gone. Naturally, none of this is canon at this point, but who cares? The story's really cool, the setup's great, you care about the characters, you especially care about Starkiller, he's a really cool character. As I mentioned before, there's one game on this list that had a native enhancement, and that's The Force Unleashed. This has an Xbox One X patch that enables a 4K resolution. Now, it still only runs at 30 frames per second, but man, the image quality is really nice here. It looks super crisp. While the basic combat is very dynamic and free-flowing, lots of fun, the heart and soul of this are the over-the-top Force abilities. The game has tons of physics and destruction, throwing things around, blowing things up, bending things to your will. You can literally sit there and throw entire ships. And that's just the start. I'm not going to show everything here, but just trust me when I say that some of the moments in the game with the Force abilities, it gets absolutely insane. It did things with the Force that we'd never seen in Star Wars before, and that's what made this game special. And that's the neat thing about the combat. It's very free-flowing and open-ended, so you can do all sorts of different things to take out enemies in any way you see fit. Whether it be throwing them around with the Force, doing combos on them, throwing them against each other, Whatever the case, you just do what feels right to you. Now, is it a little bit clunky at times? Well, naturally, it's pretty chaotic. There's a lot going on. But when you consider this is the first Star Wars game to really tackle Force abilities at this level, it's pretty dang impressive. Now, some is going to be DLC with the outfits, but you unlock various outfits through the game that you're able to choose anytime you wish, as well as different lightsaber colors. So there's a nice amount of customization here, which gives it some replayability. Lots of different moves to unlock with your lightsaber, your Force abilities, and how powerful they are. So it's always welcome that a hack and slash has these RPG elements to it. It adds some depth. And the game really does reward you for exploring. There's tons of secret spots to find that give you additional points towards your powers and abilities. So you really do want to explore everything. But at the end of the day, it's just a fun story-driven hack and slash game. So with it looking better than ever on Series X with its 4K resolution, classic Star Wars story, incredible Force abilities, fun combat, you cannot go wrong with The Force Unleashed. It's one of the coolest Star Wars games ever released, and it's available to download and play right now on your Xbox Series X. So that was 5 Xbox 360 games you can play through backwards compatibility on your Series X right now. They're not delisted, they're not unavailable, they're available right now to purchase, and you should absolutely give them a chance and check them out. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching up to this point. God bless, and I'll catch you later.